This is your coffee break. Hi, friends. I am back again this week with a wonderful guest that I'm so excited to have on the show. Karan Bajaj is a #1 best-selling Indian novelist with more than 200,000 copies of his novel in print. Both have been optioned into major films, which is really exciting. Karan's first worldwide novel, The Yoga of Max's Discontent, will be published by Random House on May 3rd, so that's just coming up really soon here. The book has been called The Greatest Adventure of Our Generation by the Daily Telegraph, and it was actually inspired by Karan's one-year sabbatical traveling from Europe to India by road and learning yoga and meditation in the Himalayas. Karan has worked in senior executive roles at companies like Procter & Gamble and the Boston Consulting Group and was named among Ad Age's top 40 under 40 executives in the U.S. Whew. Just a few more things here. You can get his free meditation video course on his website, which is karanbajaj.com/about. That's KaranBajaj.com. And you can read more about his upcoming book, The Yoga of Max's Discontent, on his website as well. With all of that bountiful introduction, welcome, Karan. I'm so glad to have you on the show today.
Sarah, it's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.
What an introduction. I feel like you have just led such a rich and interesting life, and I want to hear all about it. First, do you want to say a few things about yourself in your own words?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I guess the best way to start is that I kind of follow a little bit of what I'm calling a 4-1-4 principle, which is like I work very, very hard and in a particular way for 4 years, and then I take a year off.
Hmm.
And then I do another 4 years of very kind of goal-driven work and then take another year off. So I've been kind of in that cycle for the last decade or so, and I've done it about 3 times. And I guess that's like the reason I kind of said that as an introduction because that's been kind of the fountainhead for a lot of different things. It's allowed me to have a solid corporate career, yet have my writing, and yet be able to develop new interests. So,
Oh,
so I think that's kind of the genesis of a lot of thoughts. And then there's some like principles I follow within this year and stuff that could be interesting to your listeners. So yeah, but that's a good introduction.
oh my gosh. It sounds like maybe with the year off and you've done that 3 times. Was this your third sabbatical then?
This was my third sabbatical, exactly.
Oh, so the other two, were those also sort of creative writing centric?
So the funny thing is, see, I grew up as an engineer and went to business school and I have had a corporate career. So I actually didn't even know that I had a talent or a tendency to write creatively at all.
Oh my
So
gosh.
part of what happened in the first sabbatical was that after 4 or 5 years of working with Procter and Gamble, I took a year off to travel essentially. And during the act of traveling, I just had this feeling that I was living a relatively untraditional life for Indians because I
Hmm.
grew up in India, which is a very tight-knit community and a very like a very risk-averse tight-knit community because of more than anything because of economic reasons. And I thought like I was kind of like pushing the boundaries of that experience, which comparatively, if you think of the US, that's nothing. So many people take a year off to travel. That's no big deal. But in India, people of a certain, I guess, middle class or whatever never do that. So
Hmm.
I had this urge to to kind of write that in a story form. So that's how I wrote my first novel, which ended up doing very well in India. So I guess the part of the reason why this sabbatical thing is working very well for me is that I'm very goalless in the sabbatical. Like that's almost very conscious that the 4 years I'm working, I'm very left-brained, analytical, goal-driven. And in the one year, I'm kind of consciously goalless. I just let go of all goals physically and emotionally. So, like physically, that means that, for instance, in this last sabbatical, we just like landed in Europe by the cheapest flight from the US. So we chose the flight on the last day. It was Scotland. Was like roll of the dice was $100 of. So we chose the flight to Scotland, and from Scotland we had no plan at all. We just knew that we wanted to get to India in 3 4 months, and
Wow.
we kind of just let every day be its own decision depending on if we met someone who told us that Bulgaria is great and they were going there. So we went with them for 2 weeks to Bulgaria. So we just kind of like, I kind of consciously want to become spontaneous in this year and not be my usual like analytical goal driven self. And I think that kind of opens venues to new things in life, so as I said, the first time I started writing, the next time I kind of got interested in meditation, the third time I'm like, every time there is a new dimension that emerges. And part of the dimension emerging is to be goalless and silent for the year, to not have too much. Also, what I call emotional materialism. Like people like us, Sarah, have figured out that physical materialism, like houses and cars and stuff, don't mean anything. But like this whole, we've replaced that with what I think of somewhat of an emotional materialism in which we're very
Mm.
hungry to grow, to experience, to read a lot more books, to meet the right people, to have the five people that's going to change our lives. But I also shed all of that baggage in this year. I just probably read one or two books again and again. And I think that's been very helpful because that shuts the noise and helps me create from within myself without relying on any, I guess, external noise to help me. So I think that helps me a lot. So I think that's been a consistent theme overall is to be goalless, to be silent, and then also to strip my life of comfort. That again is very helpful because what happens in these 4 years that I'm working is that if I work in New York now, even if you don't want to, you get sucked into comfort, like, Whole
Mm-hmm.
Foods and organic food and green juices. And, you just get sucked into the whole comfort game. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for the year that we are off, like my wife and I, we are very austere. Like, this time we spent 4 months in an ashram in the Himalayas. Like we were sleeping on floors in the ashram for like 4 months in a row in dorm rooms with 60, 70 people. We had cold showers in the mountains, high up in the mountains. So what happens with that is that there's a lot of reductionism that happens physically as well.
Mm.
So once you come back, you're very honest in your work because you know that all you need to get by in life is really a floor in an ashram, that's okay. And I'm sure I can like figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's all I need, then why should I put any other criteria on my work except for doing it well? And that's good. I think all this kind of stuff reductifies, simplifies, allows me to make honest, intuitive choices, and it's kind of like helps me do well in my job as well as my writing. Yeah.
I love that. What how beautifully said too. I absolutely love that. I love the idea. I mean, you just said so many great things there. I love the point about intentional spontaneity. There's just such a delicious tension there. I absolutely love that you do that. Was it difficult sort of making the decision to write creatively for the first time when you were on that first sabbatical, knowing that you do have that engineering background? What made you decide to explore creative writing?
See, that's the funny part, Sarah. Like when you get very silent for a period of time, and with silence that could mean stripping your life of experiences and reading and like everything else, basically. You start to realize things about yourself that your tendencies that you have. So, for instance, I just didn't know that I would write, and I just felt the need to write, and I just kind of honored that and did the started writing. So I didn't have those barriers because I wasn't trying to get anywhere with it. Like I was
Mm.
just. Like I was just honoring an urge. So right now, once again, I'm not trying to get any. Like right now, people in my like when I give media interviews and stuff for the novel, which is coming up, people are asking me like, do you want to become a meditation teacher or a or like a writing kind of like a full-time writer? And I'm like, no, I just want to be like, I'm kind of, I'm happy like this. I'm not trying to get anywhere. Like, so right now, whatever urge I have, I just follow that, and that's good.
That is amazing. Is it hard? So you do that during your 1 year sabbatical. What kind of change does it take then to go back to 4 years of work?
The tank is full when you come back and then it starts to deplete.
Hmm.
That's the nature of this world. Like the world kind of depletes your supply of, I guess, purity, if you
Yeah.
will, because like you work in a job and there is the same old, like, politics and this and people pulling you down. And you're like zen not zen is the right word, but you're like mature for a while, but then you get sucked in and then you kind of start to deplete a little bit. Same with like, you're very pure in your writing. Then you get rejected by literary agents, then you get a publishing deal. Like at a publishing house, the marketing function won't do it. The usual pettiness of life starts to
Hmm.
erode your like existence, and
Hmm.
then so you need to kind of like refuel again. So I think unfortunately until I guess reach the point where I feel just that's enough. Like those 1 year becomes 20 years, and I just want to be off the grid. But I don't feel like right now I'm just honoring the idea that I want to come back after that year and be in the world and accomplish things in the world. So that's what I'm feeling right now. I'm not yet at the stage of becoming a hermit. Could happen, and I'm open to that possibility, but it's not there yet. Yeah.
I definitely appreciate that sentiment. I take a hermitage once a year, just not anywhere fancy or anything that just a little bit north of here. But there's something so beautiful in getting away and being alone and just really finding yourself and then coming back. It gets a little depressing to know that the world will begin to weigh on you again, you
Right,
know?
right. Yeah, what keeps the hope alive is that you can sense, I can sense the tank, like, the fuel tank like depleting. So I can just sense it and I know that at least there's a period at the end of this that I'll like, replenish it again. So I'm kind of I guess more forgiving of myself for being petty, I guess. Right, yeah.
There's just something so lovely and balanced in that about accepting that you could be petty for a while because you know that you have this beautiful thing to
Right.
look forward to.
Yeah.
Oh man, I want to ask. So this latest sabbatical was yoga focused, and I'm wondering what kind of ties you saw between taking a sabbatical, doing yoga, and then how that impacted your creativity.
Yeah, excellent question. I think yoga, meditation. So I like this definition of yoga in the sutras, which nobody really mentions, but the Sanskrit word is the definition of yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, which means stopping the fluctuations of the thought waves of the mind. Right, so
Oh.
that's kind of the single one-line definition of yoga. The whole science of yoga, the physical, the meditation, the emotional, the whole science of yoga is on chitta vritti nirodha, which is it stops the fluctuations of the thought waves of the mind with the kind of the Eastern mystical belief being that once you stop the fluctuations of the thought waves of the individual, then you kind of become the universal or whatever. Like, you become one with the soul. But even if you don't believe that, the idea is that you stop your mind from vacillating. So that's exactly what happens. Like, in the year of, as I deepened my practice, I became like extremely razor sharp conscious of what was happening was that the action reaction cycle was breaking. So I think what happens typically is that we have a stimulant, like somebody's irritating us, we get
Mm.
irritated. Like the action is that somebody's being negative, and then our reaction is to be negative in turn, or angry, or like, so there's always an immediate spontaneous action reaction. I think what happens with yoga and meditation is that action reaction, there is a lag in between.
Mm.
So there is an action, somebody makes you angry. The reaction for you is that you just have a visceral feeling within that I'm getting angry. And in this act of noting that I'm getting angry, you no longer get angry. So I think what happens as a result is that if you have this whole feeling for a period of time, right, your thoughts are much more silent because you're not constantly playing, he said that, she said that, he that. You're almost kind of like observing yourself and being like, oh, I'm thinking that I'm irritated rather than I'm irritated. And I think that space allows you to be much more silent and much more creative.
Mm.
So I think that's the chitta vritti, the silencing of the thought waves of the mind, or the stilling of the thought waves of the mind. That's what I've learned. I learned in the sabbatical and has helped me.
That sounds amazingly peaceful. Do you find yourself using those practices now that you're kind of back in the work world?
Yes, I like, yeah, right now, like for instance, I have a job and then I have like a novel coming out. So I think obviously, and then I have two babies, like
Oh,
to add to the
congrats.
mix. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So to add to the mix, I have a lot of things which are like, so I think I'm now into stolen moments, which is like
Mm.
if I can get and I'm kind of consciously aware that I'm stealing moments. So for instance, if like there is a rare time that I get up at 7:30 and I know that my 18-month-old will get up at 8 and my 1-month-old is sleeping, then I'll just meditate quickly for half an hour. And then on other days I let myself be because I know that won't happen because maybe
Hmm.
either the infant or the toddler will wake up before me, and then so I try to like steal moments and not place the burden of a practice,
Hmm.
and then try to kind of have this idea of noting going on throughout the day, that I note my reaction versus react. And I think that's helpful. Like that, I'm trying to build it in almost intellectually in my head, that I'm noting, like that I note every time emotionally, but physically also. I note every time I start to walk very fast. So
Mm.
I note that because I know that means I'm not present. I'm trying to rush towards something. Or if I find myself physically leaning forward, then I know that I'm leaning towards something and not being in the moment. So I try to note more. And that's kind of my, I guess, practice, if you will, in the midst of the world.
You talked about when you're on your sabbatical, you just let everything go from the work world. When you're back in the work world, do you let any of that creativity back in? Like you talked about noting the way that you're thinking and feeling. Do you do that through journaling at all, or do you do any other creative stuff during those 4 years?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I don't journal or do like the three morning pages or whatever. I
Hmm.
just I just make it a point to create every day. And when you mean create every day, that doesn't mean writing a novel. It could be thinking about a concept, writing a blog, shooting a YouTube video on my own. It's a very like peaceful act for me to think of a concept, rather
Mm.
than just read or like not. So I try to think of a concept, and like either I put it out there in the form of a blog or a YouTube video, or I sometimes don't, and I just kind of like, I think that act of creation every day keeps me, I guess, pretty honest.
Oh, I know it's getting in touch with that, that really deep part of yourself.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something that you said, and you talked about it in when you were talking about yoga. You mentioned not having like the burden of a practice, and I kind of want to ask. There's sort of a tension there, a dichotomy there, thinking about something that's very freeing and peaceful as being a burden. Can you talk to me a little bit more about sort of that balance?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think it's actually very good to have a disciplined practice. Like it is very, very good. Like I've seen the effect of committing to 30 minutes of meditation in the morning and 30 minutes in the night. I've seen the practice like have a tremendous effect on my life.
Mm.
But I think you have to be a little like forgiving of yourself when the environment changes very dramatically rather than feeling like guilty about it all the time, right? So I think I try not to feel very burdened by any concept. So even this idea of like, I need to do this 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the night is a little bit of a concept that's enforced by you.
Mm.
And so anything that weighs you down as a concept should, I guess, I just want to live my life a little baggage free. So as long as my heart viscerally is saying that this is a very useful practice, and as a result, my physical self is following that visceral instinct, then it's good. But if it's like, my heart is saying that no, I can't do it because I have a toddler who's wanting something right now, and then I don't want my body to be resisting that. Like in the sense, I just want to flow.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But having said that, I think in the beginning phases when it's hardest to build a routine, it's very good to have discipline. Now
Mm.
I've also been meditating for about 5 years now, so I've a little bit, not to say that I'm any kind of an expert in any way, but after 5 years, some concepts have internalized very well, I think, which hadn't internalized in the first 5 days. So I think it's a little bit, slightly easier now to go through ebbs and flows.
Mm-hmm. I kind of want to switch gears just a little bit and ask you about your book, which I'm really excited about. Do you mind if well, I was going to say, do you mind if I read the blurb, but would you rather just talk about it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the Yoga of Max's Discontent, it's being published by Random House. Within that, there's an imprint called Riverhead, which is a very small but wonderful imprint, which does only a few books a year. The premise of the book is that it's about an investment banker who becomes a yogi in the Himalayas. So a Wall Street investment banker who becomes a yogi in the Himalayas as he deals with his past of being growing up in the Bronx in the housing projects and stuff. Like to for me, the I guess the biggest challenge of this novel was that I wanted to combine entertainment and meaning, right? So
Mm.
I wanted it to be about a deep personal journey of transformation that the readers embark on, and yet it should be a completely page turning adventure, because I don't want this to become a PhD thesis or a fable or
Mm-hmm.
like, I want it to be a story. First and foremost, it's fiction, it's a story. And any learning that the reader gets is because the character has experienced some truth and not because I, as an author, know a truth, almost. So I
Mm-hmm.
think there are many points, even in the book, in which the character and I have bifurcated about our learnings, and that's because the character has followed a certain journey. And I think that was the challenge for me, to let go of all authorship, let the character run their story, and so in the end, I think if I were to like in its summary, the book is really, as the Telegraph says, it's the greatest adventure of a generation, because it's really a page turning story from the Bronx to hidden night markets to surreal ashrams to remote caves in the Himalayas. So it's a very page turning, like the wild, like into the wild kind of a like a very fast moving journey. And
Mm-hmm.
then, like as a consequence of that physical adventure, there's an emotional transformation that happens. But that's not like a pedantic. There's no pedantic theology in this that I'm trying to communicate.
That's for me, that's the real beauty of fiction. It's when,
Exactly.
yeah, this is why I love to read. And I have to tell you, I work a full-time job and have all of these other things. And I just decided I got an advance copy and I decided just to open it and just get a feel for your language and the flavor of things. And it was a page turner. I couldn't stop. Like there was never a good point where I'm like, okay, I can stop and be satisfied. And so I actually read way more than I intended to. And I think that's a testament to your
Uh,
storytelling abilities. But
uh,
oh
Thank you
my
for
gosh.
saying that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it is really enjoyable. I can attest to that. And I'm actually really looking forward to finishing it now. Was it difficult not to get pedantic because this was based on the very limited knowledge I have of your experience? It seems a little bit autobiographical. Was there a weird place where it took a sharp turn away from your story and became Max's story?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think it did happen like that. I think the first couple of drafts were very pedantic.
Hmm.
And I think after getting some distance from them, I started to realize that they were very pedantic. So I had to then consciously get honest again on what was the character experiencing and creating a true fictive dream.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to kind of completely relinquish control as an author. And yes, it was like it was a challenge, but I think by the end it became very what was the mind-opening part was truly understanding every day in my character's life. I think what was happening before was that I was kind of glazing over the first. So it's about a Greek, like he's a Greek origin investment banker. So perhaps I didn't understand being Greek in the housing projects in the US very well, right? So as a result, I was like, kind of, I didn't fully understand his background. And as a result, I think what was happening is that his choices were my choices, but his
Mm.
background was not my background. So the moment I kind of immersed myself in his first 30 years, which actually don't appear in the book at all, almost, or appear as like very, in very small flashbacks that they don't appear. That's not a major chunk of the novel. It's probably 20 pages of a 350-page novel. But that 20 pages or that background shaped the whole view of the story. And I think in the beginning, I didn't understand that background as well as I understood through the subsequent act of writing it.
Interesting. Did you go through and write out those 30 years? Is that how you got that experience?
Part was that, and part was spending a lot of time in the Bronx and reading a lot about the Bronx. So I think I must have read 50 books about. So I think if I were to to put it in perspective, for the first 30 pages, I have read 50 books, and for the next 320 pages in research, I've read 5 books. Because the next 320 pages were very familiar with me because of my life, and the first 30 pages were very unfamiliar with me. So I became very immersed in living that. So I must have read like 50 to 70 books and like countless articles for just those 30 pages, which kind of form the thrust of the novel.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, if I look at the reviews are like very heartwarmingly incredible. Like, if you look at Goodreads and stuff, I don't know, like I'm up to 125 advanced reviews, and they're still all almost 5 stars, and it's very, very touching. But even then, if you look at the reviews, also they still point out that the novel truly kicks into gear when it gets into India after 30 pages. So
Ah.
despite my, I guess, honesty, it was still feeling, I guess, heavy for the reader, or they were sensing that it wasn't. That there was still a presence of an author. The moment it gets to India, they're all saying that they're completely lost in the experience. Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
gosh, that's so interesting how those truths do come out. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
exactly. They do come out, and yeah, and I I should be promoting my novel, but I'm being honest in saying that people are commenting on the first 30 pages, and but the reviews are like on the whole overwhelmingly very, very positive, but like still flash of it's my slips are obvious to the reader. Yeah.
I feel like the theme for today's episode is just honesty. You've talked about honesty several times, and I love that you're willing to be honest and authentic about the reviews. And I love that they're overwhelmingly positive as well. And I think you're balancing that very well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. What was your favorite part about writing this novel?
Favorite part about writing this novel? Okay, so the favorite part is actually, without giving away too much, there are some small, I wouldn't say supernatural because that sounds very, I would say there's some mystical experiences that happen in the novel,
Mm.
which are very interesting to me personally because I've read a lot of ancient yogic text. And in the ancient yogic text, which goes back to 10 centuries before Christ, you see a lot of examples of people who've developed extrasensory powers, reading minds and walking on water and all that kind of stuff, right? Levitating.
Hmm.
And your first reaction to all of that as a rational thinking person is that's either mythology or whatever, and it doesn't make any sense. But as I was kind of like researching this novel and also experiencing parts of the novel, a lot of these concepts became like, so for instance, let's break this down to like a concept about reading somebody's mind.
Hmm.
On paper, this would be like, oh, like that's a mystical thing. But really, if you dissect that a little bit more scientifically, words are just a grosser form of thought, right? So there is a feeling that emerges in the heart, it becomes a thought in the mind, and it becomes a word in the mouth, right?
Mhm.
So that's kind of the process of what happens. If you are in a place physically and emotionally that you're completely silent and completely attuned to nature and life, why is it so hard a leap of faith to assume that you can read things at a more subtler level? Like, right, so instead of words, which are a grosser form of feeling, why can't somebody just read feelings? So I think, I don't know. So as I look at concepts like these, thing like what you would think of mystical, unexplainable experiences, the yogic text explains it in a very scientific, rational kind of way. And for me, that, like putting that in a story form and like a character developing some of these experiences and to present it very logically to the Western mind was both very interesting and very fun.
Oh my gosh, I bet. That sounds absolutely fascinating.
At its heart, it's a very page-turning adventure through India. So if you are interested in new worlds, I think this will open your life, like open your mind to a little bit of a new world outside in a very page-turning way. And then I hope that there is a message of transformation here, but nobody's hitting you in your head to take away any message. Like, yeah.
I appreciate that. And I'm even
Yes.
more excited now, like just to hear the enthusiasm and the love in your voice for this work. I'm just so excited to finish reading it now and to have that adventure. So,
Thank you.
gosh, thank you. Well, thank you. This is very exciting. There was a really wonderful article in the New York Times that was written that you wrote.
Yes, on
Yes.
Sunday. Yeah, just a week
Yes.
ago. Yeah.
Which is wonderful timing. And I read it through a couple times because I liked it so much. There's just some very interesting things in here. One of the things that stood out most to me, you talk about going on your third sabbatical and learning yoga. You felt like a beginner again. Can you tell me a little bit more about that feeling?
Yeah, and that's happened in almost every sabbatical where there is a lot of deconstruction of the concepts that happen because knowingly or unknowingly, I guess we get very weighed down or attached by different identities. I think, like, if you're successful in the corporate world, you get, like, I guess, weighed down by that identity that you're like a brilliant marketer or whatever you are, or this kind of a writer, I'm more a non-fiction writer, or I'm like this. I guess I like magic realism. So you're just weighed down by a lot of concepts. And I think the power of a journey like that is that there is a lot of dissolution of those concepts that happen for me. Like for instance, when went and did yoga teachers training in a very rigorous ashram in the Himalayas, and I had actually barely done 10 days of yoga before that in my life. And I
Oh
went
my
straight
gosh.
into doing a teacher's training in a place where everybody was an expert and was like practicing for 10 or 20 years before I guess doing it. So I think, yeah, so the power was that like I was a very humble beginner who was falling, being slapped around by every guru for just like having no control of my body and my mind. And I don't know, I think those kind of things are very reductifying, like they're humbling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great. For a year I'm a nobody, like I'm no director in some consumer company or like some best-selling author. Like I'm nobody, I'm just a guy who sleeps on a floor in an ashram and doesn't know any yoga, and like everybody says is restless physically, mentally, and that's great. I think I like that complete dissolution, because then you come back and you're very grounded. You're not flying high and labeling yourself with a lot of notions about yourself.
You have had a very successful career too. I mean, both in writing and in sort of marketing and advertising. And so just seeing that you're willing to sort of let those labels go is I think a really powerful testament.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge. Yeah, but it's good because every time now I know 4 years later, or maybe now 2 years, because I've been out, we've been around from the sabbatical for 2 years. I won't go and learn to become a yoga teacher again. I'll probably learn something else, which will again put me in a very humbling beginner place. And I don't know what that is, nor do I want to know yet. Like it'll come by itself, that inclination. And I think that's good. It'll be again humbling again to be a beginner. And I think that's always powerful. It comes back, may you come back very humble from the whole experience. Yeah.
Hmm. For you, what is the value of that humility then?
The value of that humility is just like this idea that you become a vessel for your work. I think
Mm.
in a way, like you're not trying to get anything from it or get anywhere. Like a tree just grows and bears fruit. It's not questioning whether it should wear a suit and go to office, right?
Mm.
It's the nature or the tendency of the tree is to just do that. So I think what happens to me is that once I come back, I'm like, okay, I'm in this job, and I guess my nature here is to do my work and not to become the CEO or to become that or to become this. Like it's very reductifying in terms of, to just become a vessel for whatever I'm meant to do.
I feel like I can learn a lot from that. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, Sarah.
Yeah. A lot of new writers, unpublished writers listen to this podcast. Do you have any advice for those writers?
What would I say? Like it's so contextual on your
Mm.
particular situation. Have you been rejected a lot of times? Have you never been rejected? Is this your first novel? But I guess if I were to simplify it, I really like the parallel of a story and a life. In a good story, there is a character or a protagonist who's striving for a very lofty, unattainable goal and is facing conflict after conflict and stumbling often and picking themselves up again in this pursuit of a very lofty, unattainable goal. And in the end, in the climax, even if they win or they don't win, doesn't matter, right? Like you've enjoyed the story just because the character has given it its all towards this very lofty goal. So I don't know. So if you treat your life as a bit of a story and keep asking yourself if you are pursuing a lofty, almost unattainable goal which is beyond your reach, and are you stumbling enough to get that, then I think that leads to very interesting stories. So if you live an interesting life, that leads to an interesting story. And if you think of your life as a story, you lead an interesting life. So I think I find like writing has been very helpful to my life that way. I kind of keep thinking, is this a story or is this like avoiding a story, you know?
I love that. You were the first
Yes.
person I've talked to who has said something like that. So I
Oh, really?
absolutely,
Okay.
yes, no, this is good.
Okay. Yeah. So I think, yeah, I think that, so like to, I guess, learn from your writing and be a story in your life, then I think what will happen is that your writing will be very deep and profound as a result, because you'll probably kind of take inspiration from your life into the story and it'll be very different versus like, the usual serial killer story or like whatever the 18th story on the 180th story on the damaged detective, like you
Hmm.
end up creating more original ideas because you're living your life like an idea.
This is not one of the questions I had planned, but do you read a lot of fiction?
Very good question. I do. My tastes have changed a little, but yes, I do read a lot of. Have read a lot of fiction. Somehow, right now, everything is feeling a little incomplete in fiction. Like I feel like it's not raising the right questions for me or giving me the right answers. So right now I'm like a little bit off fiction. I don't know. The last book I read was The Light Between Oceans, which I liked.
Mm-hmm.
It's an old book, I think. About like a lighthouse in Australia. Not the light, all the light you cannot see, but the light between oceans, which is
Mm-hmm.
so that was the last fiction that I enjoyed. But right now I'm a little bit on a non-fiction-ish diet.
I
Yeah.
understand. Yeah. I get that way too. I
Sometimes,
read in
yeah,
phases.
yeah, exactly. But I'm a voracious fiction reader. Yeah, in general.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, that was an unscheduled and unplanned question, but I'm glad that you answered it. The very last question I want to ask you is during your sabbatical, was there just one lesson that you learned or one piece of advice that you received that you'd like to share?
Yeah, okay. So it's a again. I think I'm taking your interview into completely metaphysical, like
No, this is awesome.
soulful trajectories. Okay, so I there is this concept in the Yoga Sutras, which is that like what is the meaning of life, right? The age-old question. So
Yeah.
it defines the meaning of life as a bit of a flight of an eagle, right? So the eagle first spreads its wings very high and then brings its wings down. And that's what life is, that you first have to stretch the boundaries of experience, flap your wings high, grow as much as you can, and then kind of gently bring the wings down. And that kind of completes the cycle of a life. So I guess my point on that is that there is a role for, like, I think you should just live each experience completely. So when you're in that growth phase, you know that you know it intuitively that you're in a very growth phase because you're seeking experiences.
Mm-hmm.
You should just be very unrestricted in seeking experiences and richness in your life and pushing the boundaries of growth. But then you do reach a point, I think, when the world and its experiences start to appear a little stale and repetitive. And
Mm.
if you keep doing the same things again and again in that, you're stuck in a rut of a kind. So like for instance, you have gone to Europe 10 times or whatever, and if you go to the 12th trip to Paris to see a castle and have like a glass of wine, then maybe you've reached a point where that is not what, maybe you are craving a deeper sense of silence within, and maybe your vacation or your experiences should then change dramatically to accommodate that. So I don't know, it's a long answer to the point being that that's the kind of the flight of life, is to experience and evolution experience a lot and then go within. and to live each phase with a lot of like depth and recognize it when it's happening.
That is a beautiful answer. Thank you so much for that. Once again, this is Karan Bajaj. He is with us today speaking about his new book, The Yoga of Max's Discontent. It is available for pre-order currently on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iBooks, IndieBound, and probably some other places as well. I will make sure to link to those for you today in today's show notes. I will also be linking to Karan's book on Goodreads, his Twitter account, his Instagram, Facebook, and of course his website, karanbajaj.com, which I encourage you to visit. He has some really cool stuff out there. I was actually watching your meditation video earlier this morning, and it was
Oh,
just
good.
really engrossing and really wonderful. And I love that you're just willing to share that knowledge with us. So,
Oh, thank you.
well, yeah, once again, thank you so much for being on the show, and just all the best to you.
It's an honor. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.